But
Okay,
yeah,
something about the Easter Triduum now. You know, the liturgical calendar, we've got seasons. And the Easter Triduum, or the Paschal Triduum, doesn't really fall within the season of Lent, neither does it fall within Easter itself. It's somewhere in between. And so, in a way, it's the shortest season of all.
okay.
Next to Christmas. Christmas is also an extremely short season, but still, you can push in maybe 2 to 3 weeks. In the old calendar before the reform of 1969 used to be longer. Christmas time would be longer.
Mhm.
But today, the shortest season in the liturgical year is definitely Easter Triduum. And
Mm.
I think when you have something which is short, it has to be extremely intense. And the image that is often given to us, we are not too sure about this because liturgical historians and archaeologists try to presuppose what would have really taken place. There are various theories. One theory would be that people would actually remain in the churches for the entire Triduum. It would be one liturgy flowing into another. And the liturgy that we see today in the Easter Triduum is also a reform, but not a reform of 1969. So it's not a reform of Vatican II. It's a reform of Pope Pius XII back in 1950. There was a reform of Holy Week and the liturgy, the Easter liturgies, and so much of what we see today, even though was another reform in 1969, much of the symbols and the rituals that we find today actually come from 1950. So it's not too long ago, including things like the washing of the feet, the Easter Vigil liturgy, the extended version with the readings and all that, quite recent.
Mhm.
The reform of 1950 was to go back historically to how the ancient Christians would have celebrated it, and so it's some form of liturgical archaeologicalism, all right, bringing that into how we celebrate the liturgy today. So often we say, oh, these are ancient rites and things like that. Yes and no.
Mm.
In a way, we don't have the exact evidence of how they were really celebrated, apart from what is written in the books. They didn't have sacramentaries from those days that were handed down and kept here, and then we can see really, we have little traces here and there, evidence of certain prayers, things which were recorded, generally not very clear descriptions, but then much of what we have has been spelled out clearly from 1950, right?
Right.
So in a way, it's ancient and it's also new. So, but I think apart from all these things, I mean, people sometimes are interested in these things and people are not interested, and you have an argument about, how old is this liturgy? Is it old? And then we are going to change it and that. I think you need to recognize, first of all, that there is this dynamism within the way things are done in the church, including its
Mhm.
liturgy. But without a doubt, this is definitely the greatest season of the year, the most important season of the year, and the holiest season of the year.
Right.
Three different groups of people celebrate this. You have the Jews; they celebrate Pesach, the Passover, and for them it is a celebration not of just of a single day. It is Pesach, and then thereafter they celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 7 days thereafter. So kind of like a little octave. So when people talk about Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it does seem as if they are two different feasts. It's mentioned in the book of Exodus that there are two different feasts. But for the Jews, it's one single seamless celebration, just like the High Holy Days, later part of the year, sometimes around the month of September and October. And so for them, unleavened bread and Passover, both of these are mentioned in the book of Exodus. We go back and you see, and they are both to commemorate, in that sense, the event of the Exodus, okay, and of the Passover. Both these festivals also, this is from biblical scholars, they have said they come from two different epochs of Israel's so-called religious history. Why? One refers to a pastoral form of lifestyle. And I'm saying pastoral is not a priest pastoral. Pastoral here means one which involves animals, the rearing of animals, the sheep, the lamb. Shepherds rear sheep. In the wilderness, when they were traveling, they could bring along animals along with them. They couldn't plant things. And the other one, the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, requires planting, agriculture. So, but in the book of Exodus, both these things are brought together, and they are instituted by God. The Jews are supposed to celebrate these two feasts as one feast to commemorate the scene. But just to think about it logically, all right? It would seem that the Passover involving an animal that you could bring along with you on the Exodus, traveling into the desert, makes more sense than the unleavened bread, which involves planting wheat. You need to have land to do that. So it would mean at least final settlement in a promised land, in Israel, before they could actually do this, all right? Just a little bit of trivia there. But it's important to see the background of our celebration. So the Jews celebrate Pesach and the Feast of Unleavened Bread as one. Then the Christians celebrate Easter. And again, Christians celebrate it according to their own way of calculation. The Eastern Orthodox follow what we call the Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar. One of the contributions, we think of Julius Caesar from Shakespeare, and a lot of stories about him, stories of romance and how he was assassinated, all that kind of thing. They popularized by Shakespeare. But one of the great contributions of Julius Caesar was during his time he promulgated a worldwide calendar that in all the different countries that fell under the Roman Empire, they would follow one system of establishing dates. Later, the West would observe the so-called Gregorian calendar. That's why there are different years are changed, and the way the year in the Julian calendar, if you go to some of these Orthodox countries, especially Russia, they may still use the designation. I think in the country, they use the Gregorian method of calculation only recently, but for the longest time, they have been using the Julian calendar, and the church still uses the Julian calendar. So every year, these three groups of people celebrate their so-called Pesach, Passover, Pascha, as the Eastern Orthodox, generally on different dates. Very close to each other. They all coincide with spring. It is a harvest festival. But only maybe once in 3-4 years do they converge, and all of them celebrate Pesach, Easter Triduum, and Pascha on the same day. All right. So good to know that sometimes when this is the thing, if you visit the Holy Land, all right, and you go to the perhaps the most important shrine in Christendom, which is the Church of Holy Sepulchre. The Church of Holy Sepulchre is traditionally where we believe Calvary is located, as well as the tomb of Jesus. So both these such important shrines that are connected to the Pesach, to the Pascha, to the Christian Passover, these places. And if you go around this time, you get a bit confused, because the Catholics will be celebrating Easter one week. The following week, you think you want to visit. The Armenians or the Greeks will have their own, and the Armenians have their own date for it, and the Greeks also, Greeks here referring to the Eastern Orthodox, they will have their own dates. And so it gets a bit tricky, because especially if you want to go in and you want to visit the tomb, everyone wants to celebrate Mass at the tomb, all right? So when is Easter? Oh, last week was Easter, Armenian Easter. This week is Latin Easter. Next week is the Greek Easter. So it's this kind of a thing, all right? Now, back to this. Why is this so important? We talk about salvation history. And if salvation history, every history has a point, a so-called omega point. If you think history is not something which is just merely accidental, then there isn't a point to history at all. But when Christians talk about history, believers talk about history, we are talking about salvation history as having a point, that everything that happened before this point is leading up to this particular point, and everything that happens after this flows from this particular point. So Easter is that point, the apex. And so all history is pushed to this very moment. It is the turning point in history. One of the ways the church explains it is this. It's about marriage, okay? So before marriage, you have got the courtship, getting to know each other, then the engagement, and then the preparation of the party, and then all the... But the highlight, the climax of marriage is actually the act of consummation. Husband and wife coming together to consummate the marriage in a sexual act, sexual union. So think of it as the entire history, salvation history, as that, a preparation for this moment of the marriage of heaven and earth. Reaching this point, first, that point arrives at the incarnation, heaven and earth, in the person of Jesus Christ. In the person of Jesus Christ, the divinity of God and the humanity of man are united as one. That's one point. And that point already you begin to see that marriage is still not consummated. The whole life of Jesus is heading towards its completion, and that completion will take place on the cross. That's why on the cross, Jesus says, in Latin is consummatum est. Different translations in English is completed. It is finished. But if you listen to the Latin word, consummatum est, it is consummated. The word that is used is the same word to use when a husband and wife, after all the celebration, the ceremony, they go to their bedroom and they consummate their relationship. They are now truly one. Two become one in that very act. So this marriage of God and man, of the Creator and His creation, the bridegroom and the bride here is the church, takes place on the cross, and the cross becomes that turning point. You know, and every consummation has to bear fruit. And what is the fruit of that consummation?
Children.
Life must come forth from that consummation. Children, like in our case, it's children. Life must come forth from that consummation. But in this case, Easter marks that new life. So that's why, you know, those little things, the traditions from the West, there they have this Easter egg thing. It makes sense. I mean, people say the Easter egg actually represents the tomb, and then the chick that comes out, new life and things like that. But if you think of this as the cross itself being the consummation of divinity and humanity, the bridegroom and the church, this is life. Resurrection is that life. New life that comes from this heavenly marriage, right? So the scene beginning from, if you listen carefully to the video, it said, Triduum begins not just on Holy Thursday morning, but in the evening with the Mass of the Lord's Supper. And it runs right through until Easter Sunday. We often say that the Triduum ends, liturgically it ends with Vespers on Easter Sunday, right? So it's a seamless liturgy. At the end of Holy Thursday, you have the procession with the Eucharist, but there's no final blessing. Good Friday, when you begin the service, there is no sign of the cross at the beginning. The Good Friday service does not end with a sign of the cross. Previously, in the Easter Vigil, we did not begin with the sign of the cross, but now with the New Translation, we do begin with the sign of the cross. Okay? There was no sign of the cross. And the only time you had the sign of the cross was the end of the Easter Vigil, the Holy Saturday night liturgy, which tells you that the liturgy has not ended yet. There is a connection between one and the other. Also, Good Friday is unique. Good Friday is the only time in a year you do not have Mass. I think for many of us, we are already experiencing Good Friday. Yeah? No Mass. No Mass. It's Good Friday. And why is it no Mass on Good Friday? St. Thomas Aquinas explains that. He explains this from the angle of sacramental theology and using Aristotelian philosophy. Yeah? And he talks about figure and reality. Right? A figure is something which points to a reality, like a signboard. It says Kuala Lumpur. All right? But it doesn't mean that it's Kuala Lumpur yet. The signboard is located outside of there. So it's pointing to there. And then you will see the signs. As you approach Kuala Lumpur, you'll see 20 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers. And after a while, you don't see the sign anymore. Why? Because you're in Kuala Lumpur. So every Mass is a sign. But it's a special sign where signboards actually point to a reality. The sacramental sign makes that reality present, right? So what is this reality that every Mass represents and points to? It's the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. It's pointing to Good Friday. What happens on Good Friday? So when Good Friday comes, just like the signboards that lead you to Kuala Lumpur, when Good Friday comes, when we reach Kuala Lumpur, when we reach Calvary, the figure disappears.
And that's the reality.
St. Thomas says, the figure disappears on the advent of the reality, at the coming of the reality. And he uses this to also to explain that the Mass will also, in the same way that the Mass disappears on Good Friday, the Mass will also disappear in heaven. Because the Mass also points to heaven. Every Mass is a glimpse of heaven. And in heaven, there'll be no Mass. Why? Because the figure disappears when the reality comes. Right? So it's interesting, the connection between Good Friday. We never think of Good Friday in that way. We think of Good Friday really as a separation from God, abandonment by God. But it is actually a glimpse even of heaven. The cross provides us with a glimpse of heaven. And that's why people generally don't see heaven. They see suffering. Every opportunity given to us to suffer, some form of deprivation or suffering, actually is a glimpse of heaven, in a way. There's another great saint, Saint Augustine. You know, when Rome was vandalized, that's where the word vandalize comes from. It comes from the word vandal. The Germanic tribes from the north, the Vandals came and sacked the city of Rome sometime in the 4th century. Saint Jerome, who was a contemporary of Saint Augustine, says, in one city, the world perished. That's how bleak it is. It's just like the news that we are getting on the news every day now. The world is coming to an end. We're in this pandemic. Everything is going to change. Sooner or later, all the food is going to disappear, and we're all going to starve to death, and the internet is going to go down. When no one is working, everything is going to just collapse. Okay? We don't have money to pay our bills. So that was the feeling when Rome was sacked. Now you must think of Rome as the capital of the entire empire. It was the center of civilization. It was the center of control and authority. And when the head is cut off, what does it mean? The body is dead. Now, Augustine wrote a book, and he entitled the book as City of God. And he spoke of two realities, the city of God and the city of man. And he says that, as much as we are subjects, we are citizens of the city of God. We live, we exist, we are created to please God, to worship Him. But the fact is that we do live now in the city of man. And we have certain duties to the city of man. And those duties are lived out in the twofold commandment of loving God and loving our neighbor. All right? But there's something he writes in book 5 of that particular book of his, and he says this. He says, good people, bad people. He says, actually, good people and bad people, they both suffer. Suffering comes to everyone. Suffering does not just come to bad people, they also come to good people. And it's not because bad people are punished and good people, are immune to it. It says it comes to everyone. But there is a difference. The difference is in experience and in the response. And he says that, for good people, even if in good times, they live not really like say, oh, this is the best time, or they are not so dependent on good times. Neither are they despondent, they despair in bad times. It really doesn't matter. And how about wicked people, bad people? Well, wicked people will be in good times, they think they are on top of the world, they don't need God, they have everything. And in bad times, they think they're being punished. So, Good Friday is our experience of that. And then all of us experience the highs and lows and bad times, good times. It's a time to remember, is it true that when we're experiencing this, that, it feels like the end of the world? It's going to be the end of everything? Or as Christians, in good times, in bad times, I continue to do what I'm meant to do, to worship God, to love my neighbor. And so this season is really a powerful season, I think, because it's not just going to be something we celebrate ritually in the churches. It's something that we are going to experience. We are already experiencing today. Yeah. And always remember, Good Friday is not the end of the story. Just like death is never the end of the story. Before Jesus came, before this so-called omega point of Jesus transforming salvation history, changing everything around, turning everything around. Yes, death is a dead end. Aristotle, Plato said, death is a dead end. That's it. So whatever you do in this life, try and accomplish everything, try and achieve everything, burn yourself out, marry the person that you love, do the things that you've always dreamt of doing, make yourself silly and happy, have a party before you die, right? Because death is the end. Good Friday reminds us death is not the end. It's the turning point. It's only the beginning. And so we should begin to live always with focusing on Easter. That Good Friday leads eventually into Easter. All right? So that's how we should be living our lives.